talking to the faculty and staff, and I mentioned that I was one of those kids, one of those technical kids. So when you're in junior high school, you had one in every class who, when a teacher jumped up and said, "Could you help me with the mimeograph machine, or the overhead, or this or that?" There was one kid, and I was that kid. I was the one who jumped up and said, "Yeah, I can do that." Well, I said mimeograph machine, and somebody said, "What?" So, but yeah, I really did start doing these talks before there was PowerPoint. I started doing them before there were computers that you could just kind of get in and do this work. I used an overhead projector. I took a bunch of photographs and I changed them over into overheads, and I was there just changing the picture. So I had done this before I had pictures and before I had all of the other kind of fun accoutrements that go along with making it interesting. My talk today is about my grandfather. It's about how he was raised and the direction that he came from, and you've heard a bunch of that already. You've heard the quotes, you've heard from the books, and you've heard some of the things that he had to say. One of the things that I found most fascinating as I started to get to know my grandfather, as I started to get to know some of the things that he had done, was to find out what was the motivation behind some of the things that he was doing. I really believe that the motivation behind many of the things that he was trying to do was about educating us, was about saying to us, this is who we are, this is who we have been, this is the direction that we're going. I very much believe that in talking to black people and in talking to white people, he was delivering a very similar message. So when he leaves Harvard and he goes to Wilberforce, he is there to teach students. When he leaves Wilberforce and he goes to the University of Pennsylvania, he is there to raise awareness about who black people are in relationship to white people. He does health disparities work that shows us, here's what white people are like over here, here's what black people are like over here in the 7th Ward. When he leaves the University of Pennsylvania and he comes here to Atlanta University, he is here to talk to people about what are black people like. Those pieces of information are gathered from around the world and they are brought into the Atlanta monographs and they are given to people as an understanding of this is what black people are like. It's not something that he does because he feels as though he needs to make it up. He feels as though he needs to identify it and clarify it. So, from my perspective, many of the things that Grandpa was trying to do in doing that clarification and making those changes happen really were, for him, answering questions both for white folks and for black folks so that they understood exactly what we were about, the direction that we were going, and why we were going there. Thank you very much. So, I dabbled a little bit in what my presentation is going to be like, so I'm going to really kind of zoom forward since I have said some of the things that I was intending to say. You've seen all of this. This has all been talked about today in the conversations that we've been having so far. To put you in a temporal place in time in terms of what Grandpa was doing and the people that he came up around. These are some of the people who were born around the same time that he was born. He was born in 1868, 5 years after the end of the Civil War. My favorites are kind of towards the bottom. Carl Bosch, for all you gearheads, guys out there who love cars, the spark plug. And then the name at the bottom of the list is Rainer Maria Rilke. He's an Austrian lyric poet, and if you haven't read his book, The Letters to a Young Poet, any of you who are writers or who are poets, it's a must-read. Again, in the temporal structure, these are some of the things that were going on about the time that Grandpa was born. So the world looked different than it does now. This is my great-great-grandfather. My great-grandfather's father in his Civil War uniform. He was in the Civil War. And in fact, there was some controversy or some question at one point as to whether, in fact, Grandpa could trace his lineage back to folks who actually fought in the American Revolution. And he went forward and he did that. Not too long ago, a couple of years ago, some folks called me up and said, "Don't you want to join the Sons of the American Revolution? You can prove that you have lineage all the way back." I was thinking not so much. Sorry. Just saying. This is my great-great-grandmother and my great-grandfather. He was Willie then. I don't think very many people here at Atlanta University probably ended up calling him Willie. As was mentioned earlier, here is his entire high school graduating class at Great Barrington, Massachusetts. Very small town, very small group of folks. And he's the guy on the far side there on the front. Your left. He did grow into those ears, by the way. And it is a family trait. We all had to grow into them. This is his graduating class at Fisk University. So he leaves Great Barrington. His mother passes away just as he is graduating from high school. He goes to Fisk University. The folks there at the Unitarian Church help him with a scholarship so that he can go to Fisk University. He leaves Fisk and he decides he wants to get his degree from Harvard. Harvard, being what Harvard is, a little bit off-kilter, said, "You have a bachelor's degree, but we don't recognize it, so you're going to have to re-earn your bachelor's degree." He ends up going to Harvard and entering as a junior. He then goes forward and earns his bachelor's degree again. This is his bachelor's degree graduating class. He's one of 6 speakers at that graduating class, and he speaks on the topic of Jefferson Davis, the Confederate president. So it's right about this point which, as I said to some folks, they should have kind of gotten a clue that he was a troublemaker. Any black man who's going to walk into Harvard University and talk about the Confederate president should be a warning to them that there's going to be some problems. And of course, he goes on to earn a PhD. He's the first African American to earn a PhD from Harvard University, and he uses as his dissertation topic slavery. So the suppression of the African slave trade is his dissertation, and it is the first book in the Harvard Historical Series, and it is, for many decades, the book that tells us exactly what slavery was like. Here are a few words from the suppression of the African slave trade, just to give you a sense of Grandpa's early scholarship. During his time at Harvard, he goes to the University of Berlin. He spends 2 years at the University of Berlin, and in fact almost gets a PhD from the University of Berlin. And you should understand, at that point in time, in the late 1800s, the University of Berlin was the greatest university on the planet. Okay? So he's standing around with some of the greatest folks there, and he comes back without the PhD and accepts grudgingly a PhD from Harvard. And so you can see some of the numbers he is putting into the work that he was doing then. We heard a little bit earlier about this controversy between Booker T. Washington and my grandfather. And yeah, I get it. I understand the difference. And here are some of the differences, just so you can see for yourself what these two men were like. As you read down the list on the left, you see what Grandpa's life was like. As you read down the list on the right, you see what Booker T. Washington's life was like. And if you look at those two lists, you see that there really aren't a lot of things different. They both didn't know their father. They lost their mothers at similar ages. Grandpa didn't have any siblings. Booker T. Washington had a couple. But the difference, the real difference for me lies in the fact that one is born in the North, one is born in the South. One is born free, a free people, and one is born a slave. One is born into a slave system that systematically took away his right to speak, his right to read, his right to write, his right to think, his right to do the things that he thought were the best things for himself and for his people. Yet and still, Booker T. Washington rises up from that background to become someone who creates Tuskegee Institute, who works to create a school system in the South, who brings money from northern philanthropists and passes that around to people here in this part of the country. That is something that you cannot deny about what that man did, regardless as to whether you agree with his ultimate position about black people or not. So when you put that controversy into the context of saying, Grandpa comes along and says, hold up for a second, wait. Let's get a clue about what we can do, who we can be, and the direction that we can go if we are given access to higher education. And that is the premise upon which the controversy begins. I put this picture in just to talk about where Grandpa goes in terms of Pennsylvania. This is a mural that is painted on the side of a firehouse at 6th and South Street in Philadelphia. And the mural, went to the mural unveiling, and it was a wonderful event. They had the fire chief, and the mayor, and a number of dignitaries there. And one of the things I just found most fascinating about the mural was the artist did it as a paint by numbers. So for those of you who remember the days when you had a piece of paper and it had a bunch of numbers on it and it had a bunch of lines and you were supposed to go put the color in, that's exactly how this was done. The people who did the painting were people from the community. So what you see here is this side of the picture represents the black firemen who were in the firehouse. If you went down 6th Street that direction, you would find there was an old black firehouse there about the time when Grandpa was doing Philadelphia Negro. So this honors those black firemen. And then the rest of the portrait talks about what he was doing with the Philadelphia Negro. And here, in the middle of the picture, you see a man in a top hat and tails, and that was Grandpa. He interviewed all of the families in the 7th Ward, all the black families in the 7th Ward, himself personally, and he went in a top hat and tails everywhere. So it was really quite interesting because the Philadelphia Negro becomes the first health disparity study that we see. He compares the health of black people to the health of white people. And he does that on behalf of the folks at the University of Pennsylvania. So for those of you who are interested in kind of the historical context, the settlement people who were brought over from Britain that came to look at issues related to race and issues related to sort of people in general, human rights, civil rights. That was, the settlement movement was what was drawing Grandpa to the University of Pennsylvania to do this work. So there are a few words in the Philadelphia Negro. The thing that I find most fascinating about the Philadelphia Negro is it took us over 100 years to figure out what he was saying and to understand where he was coming from. I work in public health. I'm an evaluator at Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. And one of the things we are just working on now is something called the social determinants of health. And the social determinants of health are exactly what Grandpa is writing about here. When he talks about at the end of this, the peculiarly pressing social problems of poverty, ignorance, crime, and labor, that statement is about the kinds of things that we're studying to look at why black people's health in the United States is so much worse than that of whites. And of course, it's over 100 years later. It's a picture of Grandpa and his wife Nina and their son Burkhart. After he leaves the University of Pennsylvania, he comes here to Atlanta University. And as has been talked about, he does a lot of work around monographs, drawing a number of people here to create this understanding, a better understanding of who black people are and what they're about. It is a turning point for him. It is a turning point for two reasons. The young man that you see in the middle of the picture here is about 7 months old, and he dies here in Atlanta because the white doctor won't treat the illness that he has. That, of course, changes my great-grandfather. At the same time, what he experiences here in Atlanta is all of the pieces that we know went on in the South related to lynching. The lynching of Sam Holmes turns my grandfather from being someone who is interested in just the research and describing black people into someone who says we have to do things to change the plight of black people. Here's a picture of him in his office here at Atlanta University in 1909. The Atlanta conferences that have been talked about were the reason that he was here. And because I'm here, there must have been someone else because Burkhart died. And my grandmother is finally alive, and that's a little faded picture of her as a baby. In 1900, he also goes to Paris to do the Paris Exposition. So as you study Grandpa over the next year, you're going to find milestones, things that he did that were important. And this is one of those ones that I think people tend to overlook a bit. He left here in Atlanta to gather from all of the historically black colleges information, pictures, memorabilia, information from all kinds of places about what black people were like. He knew, having been at the University of Berlin, what Europeans saw in looking at African Americans, how they were portrayed, and he knew that that portrayal was wrong. He knew that that picture was wrong. He knew that the way they were seeing us here from across the pond was wrong. And he made a point of going and changing that. And that's what the Paris Exposition was about. And what that did for us was it put pictures and words together in one place to say, this is what we were about. If you want to see it, I know that there are pieces of it here. I've talked to some of the faculty and staff here about that. So you can see parts of it here. There is a book called A Small Nation of People. And it has been published not too long ago. So you should be able to find a copy of that around. And that will also give you a sense of what the Paris Exposition was like. And he won some medals. Yeah, it's all good. I throw a picture of Grandpa in at the age of 35 because we are talking about the Souls of Black Folk and the Gift of Black Folk here. The Souls of Black Folk was published in 1903 when Grandpa was 35 years old. As was mentioned earlier, in Souls of Black Folk, and you can't see this very well, and it's sort of the projector and some other things going on, but at the top of every chapter of Souls of Black Folk, you have words and you have music. This happens to be his handwritten version of the Sorrow Songs. And it is in fact what he calls that music at the chapter heading to the beginning of the chapters of all the books, the Sorrow Songs. And he hears this music. When he goes to Fisk University, he leaves Great Barrington, and you saw how lily white it was, and he goes to Fisk, and you know how black that is. That's Tennessee, that's Nashville. He is going from Fisk out into some of the agricultural areas around Fisk University, and he is teaching English and math and how to write to the young people in some of these smaller schools around Fisk University. As he's going back and forward, he listens to the field hands singing, and they are singing these songs. Grandpa, while he is still here at Atlanta University, he is working with a group of folks from around the country, and they become something called the Niagara Movement. They are called the Niagara Movement for a pretty straightforward and simple reason. They're black, and they're not allowed to get hotel rooms and meeting rooms here in the United States. So they are forced to meet for the first time in Niagara Falls, Canada, as a group. The second place that they meet should hold special significance for everyone in this country, because the second place that they meet is Harper's Ferry, West Virginia. And Harper's Ferry is famous for John Brown and all of the abolitionist movement that was going on at that time. The NAACP leads, as the slide says, directly to the founding of the NAACP. So, what's up with that? What's up with that picture? There's black folk being lynched, and white folks laughing. If you could see this thick picture really clearly, you would see that there are some very young children here and here. You would also see that the folks who are looking at this man hanging in a tree are smiling. This photograph is temporally out of context. It's 1935, which is not to say that lynching wasn't going on in the time frame that I am currently talking about with Grandpa, which is 1905. But I take this picture from 1935 and I drag it back 30 years because I need you to understand and know that in 1905 and 1909, this kind of thing is going on everywhere on a regular basis. And the reason that the NAACP is founded, the reason that the National Urban League is founded, the reason that people like W.E.B. are fighting is against this. And what ends up happening is that Jewish folks, I said it loud and I said it proud, Jewish folks who have some money also hate to see this because they have been persecuted themselves. And it is them that bring money to the issue of lynching, anti-lynching, and the foundation of these organizations. So when you go and you do your research, you will first find a group called the National Negro Committee. They are the organization that comes before the NAACP. You will see an introductory letter that is signed at the bottom by William English Wallace, not by W.E.B. Bois. It was white people who invited us to come and join. You know about the NAACP, I don't need to give you that. But here are the founders: Mary White Ovington, William English Wallen, and Joel Elias Spingarn, along with W.E.B. Du Bois, Ida B. Wells, and a number of other people who co-found the NAACP. And it is Joel Spingarn who has a medal named after him, and we'll see a picture of Grandpa who wins the medal in 1920. If you go and you Google the Spingarn medal, by the way, you will see a who's who of African American leaders in this country, starting about 1915, running to current day. It is a who's who. A who's who. Did I say that the first time? Did I say that out loud? Did I say it enough for you to remember it? A who's who. Grandpa in his Crisis office. Crisis magazine is the arm of the NAACP. Starts publication in 1910 and is currently still in publication, one of the longest published African American periodicals. I have a number of questions of my great-grandfather when I see him next. And one of the questions that I have of him, why this little boy? And why this game? Because that's a game he holds in his hand. It's a hoop about this big and a stick. And the game is to roll a hoop along the road as far as you can, just using the stick. He who rolls, or she who rolls the hoop the furthest wins. Why, Grandpa? Why that picture? Why that little boy? Grandpa is also involved in a number of things that's been said internationally and nationally. Pan-African movement, you have to remember, this is 1919, the early 1900s. All of the African continent is colonized by white nations. And so he is seeking the decolonization of Africa. And this is the 1919 Pan-African Congress, which was held in Paris, France. So that's why you saw what you saw in French. The congresses are held, as you can see here. There's a larger gap there between 1927 and 1945 for the Second World War. You see names. The names should be relatively familiar to you. The Wells in that list is H.G. Wells, the science fiction writer. And the Robeson in that list is Paul, one of my favorites. It's a picture of the folks in the Pan-African Congress in 1921. As I said, Grandpa wins the Spingarn Medal in 1920. He wins it for the work that he has done in the Pan-African Congresses. So 1920 is about the beginning of the Harlem Renaissance. When I put in my biography that Harlem is one of the most storied places in African American history. Part of the reason is because of the Harlem Renaissance. And Marcus Garvey comes to the United States about this time. And at first, Grandpa and Marcus Garvey get along pretty well. But Grandpa sees Garvey as being garish, and being overbearing. And he also sees the separation of African Americans into Africans and African Americans and being sent home and that to be an inappropriate and incomplete solution at the time. You get to black folk. Sorry for the picture, it's a little fuzzy, but that is the other part of the puzzle that we're talking about today. As has been said, we needed an understanding and explanation to us, to white people, of what our contributions have been. He does that in 1900, and he continues that in 1924. I toss this one in just because it's pretty, it's funny. The ladies of the day. My grandmother gets married in 1929, and it's told that it is the largest event of the Harlem Renaissance period. No, she gets married to the poet County Cullen. Now, for those of you who haven't been married or been to weddings and those sorts of things, you know, the groom gets together a bunch of guys and he says, hey, come on guys, get my back. The ladies get together and say, okay, you know, we're going to dress up and we're going to look fine. Boys, you guys can look like penguins, it's all good. So, because she got married to County Cullen, a Harlem Renaissance poet, who are the ushers? Who are on the boys' side of this picture? That's County. One of County's ushers. Yeah, one of County's ushers. I could have ushers. Another one of County's ushers. Arna Bontemps was in this. I didn't find a picture of him. Some of the folks who came to the wedding, of course Paul came. Paul couldn't stay away. And none of them could. Zora Neale Hurston. So it was quite the wedding. It was quite the list of folks to put into one room. I'm surprised that the floor didn't break through. Grandpa comes back to Atlanta University when he leaves the NAACP in 1934. He comes back to Atlanta University, and we've heard about Philo. 1934 and 1945, he's working here doing that kind of work. He's doing a lot of education, so you see him together with other folks who are interested in African American education of that time. A picture of him and Paul together. This is the time frame around the League of Nations. And they come across a large room, like the size of this room, weaving in and out of tables to meet one another and see one another. And this is them meeting in the middle of the room. Grandpa's a troublemaker. If I hadn't mentioned that before, did I mention that before? He's a troublemaker. And part of the trouble that he causes is here. One of the things that has happened in his life in the background between the pictures is Dinah dies. Dinah dies in 1950, so his first wife. The woman that you see in the picture to your right is Shirley Grant, and he is his second wife. They get married in 1952. This picture is designed to depict one of the troubles that Grandpa gets into. He joins a group called the Peace Information Center. The Peace Information Center is interested in the denuclearization of the planet. So they're trying to get rid of nuclear weapons. But the United States government sees that as a problem. Okay? So they throw him in jail, they take his passport, and they proclaim that he is something that we've heard more recently, an enemy of the state. He gets out. It's all good. Shirley and Dr. Du Bois get married on Valentine's Day, 1952. Funny family story. Grandpa slept in Shirley's bed when she was a teenager. God, I don't get any reaction from this crowd from that. Man, what's up? You got all fall asleep? Come on. It's okay, the rest of the story is... They are very different in age, as you might be able to tell from that picture. About 20 years difference. And you know what happens when a speaker comes to town? The speaker often gets invited by the pastor of the church in town, right? And the pastor, of course, has to put speaker up, you know, put up at their house to take care of them. Much like Dr. Evans has done a very, very good job of taking care of me while I've been here at Atlanta University. What ends up happening is he goes to Colorado Springs to do a talk at the behest of the pastor in their town. The pastor happens to be Shirley's father. So who gets to vacate their bedroom in order for Dr. Du Bois to come and stay? Shirley does. So, not as salacious as it might seem on the face of it. Something died. Technical difficulties. Oops. There we go. Okay. So what is it? So, a number of different things are going on for the NAACP over the years. There we go. It's working better. I just threw this in because NAACP is something Graham is known for. Wanted to throw in some information about Brown versus Board of Education in 1954. You have to understand there was Brown, which said Plessy versus Ferguson is not true. Separate is not equal. In 55, because the Supreme Court didn't perceive that desegregation was happening quickly enough, they did the 55 decision, which was, you will desegregate schools in this country with all deliberate speed. In 1978, they decided, well, all deliberate speed was pretty fast, but maybe you chose some wrong methods. So in 1978, they talked about the methods that you could desegregate the schools. And supposedly, schools in the United States were desegregated by 1999, which is what unified status means. I would contend, not so much. Not so much. Okay. We are not moving. So, Graham gets his passport back after the business in the 1950s with the Peace Information Center. And once he gets his passport back, he decides to go and visit some friends. And one of the first places he goes is to visit Nikita Khrushchev in Russia. He wins the Lenin Peace Prize from the Russian government. He also goes to visit another friend, Chairman Mao in China. And as it turns out, there's a long relationship there, a long friendship there. Shirley Graham actually goes, after Grandpa dies in Africa, Shirley goes to China and lives there for a number of years. She actually goes to Egypt first, and then she goes to China. I tossed this picture in. 1961, Grandpa leaves the United States to go to Ghana and decides that they're getting ready to take his passport again. He doesn't want to deal with that, and so it's better for him to go and live in Accra. He goes at the invitation of President Kwame Nkrumah, who's the first president of Ghana, and I throw this picture in just because I want you to know I was cute one time. I was. I really will. Pushing the button. Okay. So Grandpa goes to Africa, as I said, to visit with Dr. Nkrumah and stay there. He also goes to write an Encyclopedia Africana. So for those of you who know Dr. Gates's work with the encyclopedia, that is the completion of an idea, a concept, that Grandpa worked on actually for a number of years with a number of folks here in the United States, going back to his time in his first time in the NAACP, and finally reaches its conclusion. Can you imagine being 90-some years old and starting to write an encyclopedia? I'm not thinking I'm going to be doing that. So, Grandpa, of course, dies in 1963, the day before the March on Washington. And this is a photograph of Kwame Nkrumah and Shirley at his funeral. They gave him a state funeral and buried him at the shore in Ghana. They moved his body to a museum in Accra at Southern time. So that's where he lives and stayed down. I'd like to thank the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, which has been mentioned a number of times here today, for all the photographs, and for my family for all their patience when I come and do these talks and put these things together. So thank you very much for your time.
Mr. McFarlane, for helping us kick this year-long study off. I appreciate your patience. Obviously, this was a special occasion, and we, in the future, will have the seminar presentations be condensed because this is intended to be a discussion. To kick off the discussion, we have Ms. Candy Tate for a very brief summary, and then we will open the floor up to discuss what you have heard here today.